Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for coming back to another DevOps Live meetup. I'm glad you're able to make it. Just want to give a small announcement for those of you that are joining today and haven't heard. Our DevOps Days Dallas DFW or Dallas DevOps Days DFW was postponed from August of this year, so it's going to be August of next year in 2021. But don't hesitate to visit our DevOpsDays.org website. You'll see a bunch of other DevOps Days happening around the world virtually. So, just go in and join any one of them. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. Also, if you follow me on Twitter at MikeRossTX, you'll also see that I've posted a lot of events that are happening, whether it be free or paid. Just follow me and you'll see what's going on around the world. Okay. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring in Micheal Fraser. How you doing, Micheal?
Good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah. So Micheal is from Refactr, and he's the CEO, and you're the lead architect or lead cloud architect, something like that as well.
Chief architect on
architect,
the product side. Yep, of our platform.
Awesome. So go ahead and just give us a little brief bio about yourself and what you do every day, most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, like you said, the co-founder and CEO of Refactr, which is a DevSecOps automation company. But I'm overall been a serial entrepreneur for almost 20 years now. Started out my career in the Air Force. I was actually worked on F-15 C and D fighter aircraft. You may have seen a story recently in the news in England where an F-15 C went down. So I actually worked on those aircraft as a armament specialist. So weapons, we did missile systems and a little bit on the bomb side too. So that was pretty interesting. And then I also was a cybersecurity engineer as well in the Air National Guard. So I was able to, get some experience around that from a cybersecurity standpoint. And then, I've had businesses since I was 19 when I was active duty. First one was a computer repair shop. I thought a retail store was the first thing that you should get into at 19, being young and thinking that I could tackle the world. And I'll have to say it was a great experience, but it kind of drove me to where we're at today, where being able to not have to deal with retail store frontage and be able to build, something from nothing, getting into the, the software space and be able to build something from nothing is pretty awesome. And it's also been an interesting journey coming from the cybersecurity or more of the ops side and getting into more of the, the DevOps, DevSecOps, and software engineering side. And as of recent, actually last year, a year ago, I got my master's in computer science from Seattle University. So I'm definitely kind of fully immersed back into the software engineering world and specifically around DevOps and DevSecOps.
Congratulations on that finishing that degree there. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I know you're big into security. For those of you that don't know, Micheal spoke at the spring edition of All Day DevOps, and he was publishing a book on there. Maybe we could share that link later. But I'm kind of curious. You have in your Twitter handle there, it says ITS code. So let's get started with some questions I have for you and see, maybe we could get some other people excited. So what do you call IT? What is IT as code?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I came up with this term a few years back, and it was really around realizing that everything was becoming software defined. So it was, as we were getting into infrastructure as code and configuration management as code and security as code and tying to APIs, we're kind of looking at things holistically and saying, hey, if it's all software defined, then that really means that my strategy is going to be focused on being much more agile my approach, if I can approach everything I'm doing, which really ties also into DevSecOps. And I don't look at DevSecOps as being AppSec renamed something else or adding AppSec into the software delivery, which is that's a part of it. But overall, it's more about thinking about things from a higher level and working with different teams as they start bringing things to become software defined and leveraging a lot of the existing tools out there. Coming up with this term was like thinking about, everything that I'm building technically, or somebody's going to build technically for an organization. There should be collaboration with different teams building things as code and being able to bring them together to be cohesive. So everything in the IT stack. And so that's really where the genesis of IT as code was. We had infrastructure as code, but that was just a piece of it. And now thinking about this like big picture, where if we can get everything into an agile process, and now we can have security and ops along with the development and the DevOps folks working together, then it all becomes IT as code, which is really kind of the place we're trying to get to with DevSecOps in general. And IT as code to us to me is a destination of where we're all trying to get to in modernizing, IT in general.
How can we? I mean, how could we apply something like that to us, to our situation? How is that applicable to us?
Yeah. So you mean like applying to
like IT
DevOps folks in general?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So everything is a solution, right? So if I want to build out, say a firewall in the public cloud, or so I'm starting to like think about things also from a security and an ops standpoint, where I may have some infrastructure, but I don't just want to deploy the infrastructure. I may also need to configure it. I may need to tie into an API. And so I started thinking about, can I do all this stuff programmatically? Can I get this into an as a code format, whether that's say a cloud template in a cloud provider, or it's a Ansible playbook? And so now if I can start defining all that as part of the IT solution that I'm delivering, then I can start thinking about this again more holistically. It's the same thing that we think about in software delivery, where I may want, I'm going to have my build process, but then I'm also going to add my infrastructure process to it. Now I want to add other things in, like doing SAST or DAS scanning on the source code. I may want to be able to do, or on source code, I may want to do more kind of like automated pen testing as well in the process. So thinking about different places where I can add in security into the mix, where each one of those becomes code as well into a pipeline, then is really about building pipelines so that everything becomes delivered as a solution. So then everything holistically looks at from an IT standpoint, where we can have all the teams involved in it, as opposed to it being bottlenecked down to smaller teams like the DevOps folks in most organizations. How do we expand this out to other teams out there like security and ops, and get them involved in this process, and really getting everything to become software? In my talk you were talking about at the Spring Break edition for All Day DevOps, one of the slides, and I always show this, is showing the OSI stack, and every single layer in the OSI stack is software. And if everything is software, then we can deliver things in a way that we've been doing, agile software delivery, and then what DevOps was originally as agile infrastructure. Now I can just have an agile approach to everything IT. So it's really kind of shifting the culture and the mindset of everybody on the technical side of an organization that fits under the IT umbrella, and everything becomes as code. Then you can enroll all these other teams involved into the process and get everybody collaborating together. So IT as code is really kind of a mindset, a shift, and taking what DevOps did so well and kind of pushing that towards including the rest of the technical folks in any organization.
Gotcha. So with that, in DevOps, the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind is usually automation. So why do you think automation sounds like a buzzword, and why is it not? Why do you think?
Yeah, so automation, just like the term orchestration or any term they use out there, is very vague in nature. And so it's really thinking about the outcomes of what I'm trying to automate, and also, if I'm doing a manual task over and over and over again, is the level of effort that it's required. So if it comes down to, like, from a marketing standpoint, and I go into a place and say, hey, we can we can automate this. We can say, okay, well, that's great, but why should I automate? So everything should be about the business outcomes, not just, hey, this product does automation. Okay, that's cool. But what is it going to do for me? Anytime that you're engaged with anybody that's looking at a new product or trying to figure out how to use something else out there, they're going to say, okay, that sounds great. You've used a buzzword out there that I can now hone in on and say, I'm definitely interested in automation, but how does automation actually apply to me? And how do I get the outcomes of what I'm looking for to take manual processes and incorporate them into an automation, with automation? And then one step further from there, you hear, DevSecOps and pipelining and so on. How do I think about how I can incorporate essentially a sequence of tasks that I can start being able to get outcomes out of it? So whether it's the business decided that they wanted to now use a particular piece of software that requires infrastructure in the public cloud, that maybe require some security tools, whatever it may be, I can think about now, okay, I need to be able to get a piece of software into the hands of my end user to be able to make them more efficient, to make them better at doing whatever their day-to-day job is. And so it comes back down to, from a marketing standpoint, we always hear these buzzwords thrown out there about how things, how we can get people interested, but really getting down to the root of what that is. Because automation by itself is no different than, back in the 70s when we heard about, ATM machines coming out, and all tellers were no longer going to be we're going to have a job anymore because of the fact that they have these machines. Right. But at the end, we have to think about what the automation is doing, and is it really going to help, or even worse than that, being kind of looking at things like, oh, well, automation could put me out of a job too, right? So we have to think about also how to adapt ourselves as well to make sure that we can embrace automation overall, and that it's not just a buzzword, but it's really about kind of a core part of the overall culture shift back to the whole IT as code thing, or DevSecOps is really a culture shift to leverage automation to help teams become more efficient, and really to be able to get, to increase the agility of the overall organization. Because another buzzword out there, buzz phrase, digital transformation, it's all about increasing the agility of an organization at the end of the day. Now, how you do it and what you do and all of that is all part about, the changing the culture and putting systems in place to help to automate and all of that. But it comes back down to, increasing the agility of the organization to be able to get the end users what they need to be able to help the business as a whole be able to achieve its mission.
Gotcha. So, I mean, you guys are into security, and you mentioned a lot of DevSecOps. How do you get security, at what point or what process, especially new companies, how can they engage more security into this automation process?
Yeah, so security overall has notoriously been, what's that?
The redheaded stepchild.
Yeah, exactly. And I know it firsthand because I'm actually one. No. So it's one of those things where security's been siloed. A lot of security products and tools out there have been primarily reactive, not proactive, into incorporating them into automation, and even down to the process and how organizations even do things. For instance, hey, I want to do a CIS benchmark, and I want to see how that maps to a particular compliance. Okay, great. I've been in organizations where the security team's still using spreadsheets, right, to go through each and every individual rule and check the box and say, yep, this is working. And so really to get security into the automation process is to enroll the security team, and the security team can only be enrolled if they can embrace things the same way that they've already embraced the tools that they're used to. A lot of them aren't coders necessarily. They're more of the on the ops side. So they live in UIs and GUIs and wizards. And so you have to go to them in a way that they can consume things. And I think that's where we've missed the mark just generally in the market, is that a lot of the existing tools and even like CI/CD platforms have been geared for developers, and we've missed the mark on trying to incorporate the rest of these folks, these teams involved into the equation. And then the other piece of it is cybersecurity engineers in general. A lot of them have been around for a long time, so predate automation and DevOps and any of that. So now it becomes down to like, how do we get those products, but then also take those products and change and adapt them to what is happening out there in the market too. A lot of organizations are saying, you know what, let me get out of doing traditional, say, IaaS, and I want to start doing more cloud native stuff, or whatever they're trying to do. But the whole point there is then you have to start looking at how these products are incorporated with other newer modern ways of doing things through stuff like containers and microservices and so on. And then when we look at that, we also have to say, okay, are the tools we're using going to be able to be used with that? Or what else am I going to need to incorporate into my overall process? And how can I add that in to my automation process or my pipelining process to make sure that I have exactly the tools and the security gates that I need in my pipelining to make sure that I'm able to incorporate automation in there. And again, the reason why a lot of these a lot of security has been lagging in automation has to do a lot with the vendors in the space and the fact that security practitioners as a whole aren't out, used to using a lot of the tools out there than even some of the automation content that's built out there. So if you go to like a vendor's GitHub or GitLab, and look at their repos, you'll say, oh, that's cool. You built this out in Terraform. You built this out in Ansible. How do you get that into the hands of a security person who has no idea about what Git is or how to incorporate that into some sort of CI/CD pipelining framework or the underlying tools like Terraform and Ansible? So it really comes that we have to meet them at a place where they can start consuming this content in a way that they can incorporate that into their own process and get everybody enrolled into the agile approach. And that's really how we're going to be able to catch security up, because unless we do that, we're going to still have the issue where security is on its own little island, separate from everybody else, and we just hand things off to them, wait for them to do what they need to do, and then hand it back. And that's not a part of the overall life cycle that we're trying to get them into, where you can have, close the loop and add security in and close the loop on feedback too, so they can be incorporated into the overall process.
Gotcha. Let me mention this because I know we have a few viewers online. If you have any questions, feel free to post them. And while we wait for some of you to post some questions, I'll just keep asking Micheal, because he talked about CI/CD pipelines, and I guess for some people that may not be understanding what CI/CD pipelines are, what are those to you, and how do you get securities involved in that pipeline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So CI/CD pipelines are, CI/CD stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment. And it's really about building out a sequence of steps that traditionally have been mapped to a software delivery process. So I create some code. I want to go commit that code to my Git repo. Then I want to trigger off some things that'll happen when I do that. I may incorporate some infrastructure into the process, so then I can have the entire build, including infrastructure there as well. But it's all about the sequence that I'm going through to be able to get the end result, which is either I'm trying to push code out to production, I'm trying to build out, my continuous deployment of infrastructure as I expand that out as well, and I update my my code as well, and then having, multiple developers involved in that process as well. So traditionally, CI/CD has been geared towards developers and towards software delivery. And some good examples of that are GitLab, GitHub, Circle CI, really solid products out there, and they're focused on that. But what we're finding is that a lot of organizations, kind of back to my whole thing about cybersecurity vendors, is that the security team wants to be able to start getting involved into this process too, because they want to be able to get some of the products that they're already deploying and maintaining on premise into the public cloud, or get it into a process that they can have that is iterative and agile in its approach. And so looking at what they're able to say, okay, well, back to my comment about, hey, what does this vendor have available? Oh, I can spin up this particular product, or I can tie into their API, or I can, whatever it may be. And now I can start thinking about, oh, okay, well, as a security, a cybersecurity engineer or security practitioner, I can look at, oh, okay, well, how do I take that existing content and the tools that I'm using it in and put it into a process where I can have a sequence of tasks that happen. And then when I make changes to anything in that process, I have the ability to iterate on it, make those changes, and then be able to do things really quickly. And so that's the really kind of the overall dream of getting CI/CD out there in a broader exposure and incorporating security and the ops teams involved. Because if you can get everybody involved into this process, then you have a repeatable process that everybody can do, that they can use. And now you have the ability to get the end results or the outcome you're looking at, whether it's just building an IT as code or software-defined solution in the public cloud, releasing software. It should be all one and the same. It shouldn't be any different on what you're trying to get as your as your process, even if your end result is different depending upon what pipelines you build.
Right. So these cybersecurity professionals, they keep track of those things, like you said, on spreadsheet. They can't just pull in that spreadsheet into a CI/CD pipeline.
No. Yeah. Exactly. You have to really think. Yeah. Exactly. You have to think really about each of the sequence of tasks that you're going through and what it's also going to take. So the other piece I always like to preface when I'm talking about this is, like, if you're going to automate and you're going to build out pipelines and so on, you really have to think through what exactly are you automating, what's the level of effort too, because you might find out that sometimes doing it manual is easier just in isolation by itself. But if all of a sudden I need to do that one step 10 times, or I need to do that 10 times 10 different people, then I'm looking at at the order of magnitude of how this is actually going to impact the organization, and then also looking at the level of effort. So if that individual task each time takes, say, an hour, right, and I need to do it 10 times every month, and then I need 10 different people doing that, and it may take me 10 hours on the front end to automate that, then I can justify the amount of time it's going to take to automate it. So you really kind of have to look at the pros and cons every time. And I say, like, everything is not, you're not going to automate everything. That's usually never going to happen. But
right.
If you start looking at, if you can take things that you're doing a lot and put them into a process and automate those, and then start automating other tasks and chaining them together, all of a sudden, at the end of a month, at the end of 3 months, 6 months, you'll look and see, okay, well, my efficiency is increased here by X number of engineers, and usually it's about augmenting the existing engineers you have and being able to help to automate what would normally they would be doing from a manual process standpoint. So it's really about kind of gauging and balancing out, how much time, just humans are spending on manual tasks, and then figuring out, which ones make the most sense that are, that could be put in some sort of repeatable process. And that's really where, finding out what that looks like and how to streamline that into a CI/CD process to incorporate other teams that usually have never been thought of as using CI/CD.
Yeah. And so at what stage would you say it's important to have security in this CI/CD pipeline? At the beginning of the development stage, in staging, and in testing, and in production? I mean, what part do you want security to be highly engaged in?
Well, yeah, definitely production. But
Yeah.
if you're coming back from that, is as early in your pipelining process as possible, and then also depending upon what you're doing at the very beginning when even you're creating your code. So being able to put guardrails in place for yourself, even when you're, say, building something out in a particular using some sort of linter, or being able to gauge if you have credentials that you may have accidentally slipped into your code commits, to kind of the next stage is where, hey, I built this out, but is the infrastructure that I have this on secure? Is the source code, even before that I scan, are there any vulnerabilities or things I need to check out? And so really figuring out also the overall risk that your company is willing to kind of go through if you move where the security is going to start inside of your pipelining. And the more mature your pipeline is, the harder it is going to be to incorporate security into your overall pipelining. So you really have to think about, at the entry points, what is the value that's going to happen there? And again, a lot of times it's a handoff to another team. So if you can have that incorporated into your process, you should be able to increase your overall efficiencies and cut down on the overall time it takes for any of these teams to engage if it's in the process versus, having to hand it off, having to do something and then hand it back. So I would say as early in the process as possible, but be realistic about what that means and the level of impact for your overall company. And any time you create net new pipelines, try to create a standard for yourself where you're going to incorporate certain security tools into the mix, follow certain security practices, and make sure that you understand the impact of anything that you're doing at any single point in your overall pipeline.
Gotcha. I want to come back to this question because I have another question, but there's somebody posted something in the chat here, and it's from Suresh. He comes at it and asks, IT as code is a new term that he's hearing, and just to be clear, this is IT as code is something that you guys have coined, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yep.
Yeah.
So
and kind of explain a little bit more, just in case, a little bit in depth, if he wants to understand what IT as code means.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to IT as code is looking holistically as everything becomes software defined, and inside and outside of software delivery. So when all of a sudden you're able to software define your infrastructure, you're able to software define your configuration, you're able to software define your integrations between APIs, you're able to software define your security. All of that holistically works together as the phrase I've termed IT as code, that you're able to now look at the same processes and automation and everything and how you're going about doing things, mapping to every single team that fits under the umbrella of IT, so that everybody's able to follow the same agile iterative process. If it's become software defined, you can do that, and that's where IT as code comes in, and that's where it really is a new term, but it's a term that is really catching on and gaining some momentum, because this is where the destination everybody's trying to get to, which is, if I can software define my infrastructure and bring it to the public cloud, if I can software define the configuration of anything that I'm creating inside of an application, and it's also about the repeatable process. So if I'm able to repeat the overall process and bring in other teams as well, like security and ops included with the DevOps and dev team, I'm able to have everything under the umbrella of IT become as code. And really this is helping to modernize what has traditionally been more of a project-based, especially on the traditional IT and the security side, project-based, hardware-centric, obsolescence cycle kind of built in. Once you abstract away the hardware and everything is software defined, you now have the ability to do things in a way that wasn't possible at all when it came down to traditional projects that required hardware that mapped to the security and the ops folks.
Gotcha. So coming back to this question that I posed earlier about CD pipelines and security and everything, have there been situations, because I know a lot of security professionals tend to do, like, for example, my brother he used to do a lot of security audits, and how do you get security audits into like a pipeline? How do they go about? Are they manual, or have you seen any?
Yeah, so it maps back down to the certain types of compliance requirements that you're going to try to map to. So whether it's say FedRAMP or PCI or a SOC 2, those type of compliance, there are a fair amount of tasks that are involved that can be automated. And so there are companies out there that have created a bunch of different automation content out there to be able to provide, FedRAMP as a service or SOC 2 as a service, which is great. Or HIPAA, yeah, it's a good another one. And thinking about mapping those to different compliance, that also requires different types of tools and visibility on what you're doing inside of the process. So a good part of that overall in understanding that process is also understanding, like, what am I trying to do to certify, say, the underlying infrastructure? Am I going to try to map that to a particular benchmark like Center for Internet Security? And then I have to look at, okay, if I'm going to do that, that's awesome. But then how do I also look at what I'm going to use from a tool perspective? So a good example of that is like Center for Internet Security has a tool called Syscat Assessor, and that assessor allows for you to run the tool against infrastructure, against the cloud, against different types of applications, and you'll get an assessment of what that looks like against the official benchmark that they release out there. And so a way to kind of help when it comes down to compliance, especially when it comes down to compliance and the end of the day, the auditor wants, to see a report, wants to quantify, are you abiding by these particular, requirements or not? What does that look like? Show me the proof. And so having some sort of process to be able to get the reporting behind it, but then also understanding what it's going to take to also remediate, which is the harder part, right? So the assessment piece is, something you should definitely do, but then understanding what it's going to take for you to be able to get everything into the state that they're looking for, that's going to allow you to not only pass the compliance that that you have an audit for, but then also be able to, recertify, or anytime any changes are made. And so this is where this goes back to my whole thought process around having a more kind of holistic view on all of this, is that if you're going to start incorporating some of these tools in the mix, even if they're more about infrastructure or applications, but I can certify certain things that now I can check the box off during the audit process, then I can start looking at incorporating other tools or other things that, or technology that's going to give me the ability to show an auditor, this is what it looked like when I initially looked at what we're trying to do. And then this is what it looked like after I am enforcing the requirements that are going to be able to map to the compliance requirements I have. And so thinking about that, and what tools I can use, and the other piece is like, are there open source tools as well? And so my whole philosophy there is you should look at a mixture between paid and open source tools as you're creating your overall pipelines. So you can say, this tool makes a lot of sense for me to use because I'm going to pay for it because I need this, and it's going to give me the reporting or the assessments or whatever I'm looking for. But then there may be some open source versions that there's a lot of contributors out there on different open source projects, and a lot of amazing open source tools out there. And so looking at those and saying, hey, maybe this works for me, but always quantifying level of effort of a open source tool versus a commercial tool, because a lot of times an open source tool may take more effort than the commercial tool. And so you have to think through, like, what is that going to actually, what's the impact of the overhead of using an open source tool versus commercial? So I'm a big proponent of kind of balancing between commercial and open source.
Yeah, the thing is that there's a lot of open source tools that they give you. It's a little bit limited on the feature that it has, and sometimes those open source tools have a commercial version, so that'll give you more features to do more things and do so. You could try out the open source, and then just if it has all the features you need, you could just go to the commercial version, and like you said, a mixture of both. But kind of jumping into that you talked about tools. Today I was at another conference, virtual conference, where they talked about culture. DevOps culture is always the first thing that you got to get started on, and tools is last. But a lot of these things, you can't do one without the other. So, what kind of tools do you like that are in your toolbox? Because everybody seems to have their own flavor of tools that they like the most.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's, kind of thinking about, there's tools I like, but there's also best in class tools as well, right? So if we look at like infrastructure as code, and we say, all right, what from an infrastructure as code standpoint? So when you say infrastructure as code, everybody thinks of Terraform, right? Terraform's an awesome tool. But then there's also cloud native templates and so on. So for me, like, there's different categories that I pick. So I love Terraform. It's a great tool, but it's also has a fair amount of, if you start building complicated infrastructure configurations, you start realizing that a lot of times you'll go from, having your DevOps hat on to even, starting to have to think more like a software engineer, and how stuff is structured, and how data is passed from one to another, and how you structure all your modules and so on. So I would say it can get pretty complicated depending upon what you're trying to build out there. And so really thinking about that and the impact of what it's going to have overall on who can actually support things depending on what you're trying to build out. In configuration management, I've always been in love with Ansible, been working with it, built it into multiple different projects, or different companies I have had. And so, from a standpoint of configuration management, Ansible is awesome. Love Ansible. It works well. It's really good for network automation and, more traditional infrastructure. And so when you start getting into things like Kubernetes and container-based deployments and more GitOps and so on, some other interesting tools out there like Argo CD for continuous deployment of Kubernetes, and some of the underlying technologies around that too, like configuration management for Kubernetes too. And this is some of the really cool stuff that the Air Force's Level Up program's working on with what's called Platform One. So they've taken some of these tools, which are pretty awesome, and working them into building out these modular solutions all based upon Kubernetes. And so some of these tools, you can go out there and look at their Platform One initiative. There's a Repo One, which is a GitLab setup that you can also look at some of the stuff they push out there publicly. But what I'm finding just generally out there is there's just a lot of different tools, even in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And then those map to other things you can use, like Open Policy Agent, which is really cool for policy. And this is where it gets interesting, where it's, hey, I could use Open Policy Agent, but, what am I doing on the overall security side? And is this just for trying to build and release software? Or am I trying to do other things inside of the process as well? Or am I doing some more traditional infrastructure stuff? Or do I want to look at third-party products out there as well? And so, I'll go into places where they'll be like, well, Open Policy Agent's cool, but I've started looking at some other products out there, like Tufin Secure Cloud. So are these things that I may want to do policy as code? Or back to Terraform, maybe I want to use Sentinel because I really want to be able to have the policy as code as a part of my overall Terraform, what I'm doing with Terraform as well. So for me, it comes back down to like the tools that I like. And then on the security side, obviously, Syscat Assessor from CIS is an awesome tool. Really like that tool. And then some other tools that are more open source are like Zap by OWASP, which is great for kind of DAS scanning, and SonarQube for SAS scanning. And then again, like, okay, well, is that going to work for me, or do I want to look at it from a commercial standpoint? And so on the commercial side, like Checkmarks is great on the SaaS side. And so on. But it's all a matter of what makes sense for the organization. Right. Does it fit within the pipeline that you're trying to build? And a lot of times it comes down to like, do you have budget for it? Maybe you invest a little bit of time to build out the open source version because you don't have the money to be able to spend on the commercial version too. So a lot of times that's what it'll come down to.
Yeah. Have you heard of a website called Zibia Labs that has a the periodic table for DevOps tools? A lot of people usually ask me, well, why isn't this tool on there? The thing is that, this tool or that tool, the thing is that there's so many different tools out there that you couldn't fit them all on one website with one periodic table. They usually post the most popular ones out there. But I normally tend to ask anybody that's looking for tools, post it on Twitter. Ask on Twitter, ask on Reddit, ask on any Slack channel that you're a part of, what tool do you use for this and that? And because everybody has their own flavor, you just have to try and use the best that's for, whatever organization, allow you to use. So.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is every tool chain is diverse, right? Like I come back to, there's best in class, then there's the tools that you're custom in knowing too, right? Because if I go looking like even the configuration management or on the policy side, I can, if it's like configuration management, it's like, okay, well, there's Chef Automate and there's SaltStack and so you're like, okay, well, maybe it's something you've already worked with before. Maybe if you're looking at net new, go figure out if it makes sense for you. I'm all for, as long as it doesn't take you all that much time to do bake-offs between, because sometimes you'll say, you know what, these particular tools have built-in modules that are going to really help me, and it's going to be so much better than this other one, or this has the support for this particular cloud provider in a much better integration, or this supports this Git, provider in a much better way for me because I decided I want to use GitLab versus GitHub, whatever, right? Yeah. Thinking about the different touch points of where you're trying to incorporate different systems into your overall pipeline, and then also what you're going to be able to do level of effort, because anytime you're learning, especially anything net new from a tool perspective, you have to think about the cognitive overhead of what that's going to require for you to have to get into that. And so I would say try to start small and try to figure out some use cases for yourself that map to tools that you can get quickly up to speed on, because getting something working is, inherently something that's always going to be better for you than trying to like plan everything out. It's the age-old argument of waterfall versus agile, right? Like, I want to, if I can see something working and I've worked through it, then I can easily start iterating on it and even incorporating other tools or doing, more advanced things as well. So I always start small if you're
a lot of times it depends too on the time frame of your project. How quickly you need to get this project out. What tools what tools can you get them out quickly. So I mean, that depends a lot too on the whole matter, choosing the right tool. But so what kind of let's see here. So on to my next question. You talked about tools and stuff. For those that are planning out their IT budget today, where do you think they should be putting their money in whether it be in tools, investing in people, and where do you think the real money should go into?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's one of those where it really depends on the overall organization and where your overall maturity is from a DevOps or a DevSecOps perspective. Right. So first and foremost, depending upon the size of your organization and your maturity level, will all dictate, if you're going to invest into, obviously having people is critical. Then from there, also understanding, all right, how do I empower these people to do more themselves? Because as we all know, there's a supply and demand issue when it comes to DevOps engineers and DevSecOps engineers. And so if we're going to be able to get or have these folks be able to, use different tools and building out pipelines, it comes down to also like, what are tools that you can invest into that are going to help you versus open source, or maybe it's a support contract that you get, or to your earlier point, or an enterprise version of a product out there that's open source that you may want to be able to do, more work within, or it's going to make more sense for you for your overall organization. I would also say looking at, which tools make the most sense to pay for enterprise versions of those software versus ones that stay open source. A good example of that is like, if you want to use, say, Terraform and Ansible, you're probably not going to pay for Terraform Enterprise and for Ansible Tower. And so thinking about which one makes the most sense for the different types of workflows and processes that you're going to require, and then which tool you're using more as well, and for what purpose is really critical. And then on the security side, the same type of thing, but also like incorporating, a lot of the tools out there are about coming in and fixing what you've already created, right? Being much more reactive than proactive in the process. And so investing into tools that you can start incorporating right into your overall pipelining process that can immediately, you can start seeing value in, whether it's incorporating a scan sooner from when you're doing your code commits to, hey, maybe I want to empower the security team to be able to incorporate these cybersecurity products. Maybe it's a firewall that I want to be able to spin up with my Kubernetes cluster because we've standardized on say Fortinet or Checkpoint. So you start thinking about how to incorporate those in, because you may already be paying for those products. Right. And so it may be just as much as like, hey, I want to be able to have one of my existing resources focused in on this. So you're just looking at now just kind of reshuffling around your already current investment into your existing people, and being able to figure out there, especially if you don't have to reinvest in tools, if you can use open source, but you have the ability to start bringing some of the traditional on-premise type of products, like say a firewall, into more of a software defined, if I can do the infrastructure and the configuration and so on, in the public cloud is a good example of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and a lot of that too, I mean, that question about what type of IT budget would you have for planning today would make a lot of difference whether you're talking about private sector or public sector, because both sectors usually tend to have different types of budget requirements, on how they're going to spend their money.
Yeah, and also the cycle and where you're trying to get them in. Like I'm prior Air Force, so we went through contract. I was, part of contracting before, and at the end of the fiscal year, which is September, you're scrambling to try to spend all your money so that you get that budget for the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
So that's the public sector side. But it also comes down to, can you get things in from a budgetary perspective? Does that look like something you can do on a monthly perspective? Can you do it on an annual perspective? Like what is the requirements of your organization to be able to approve what you want? And then also, one step further than the tools I was talking about, it's also focusing in on the platforms that you're also wanting to use for automation. So focusing in on the CI/CD platform that can cater to a broader technical audience that's going to be able to get you to achieve the automation that you're looking for. I talked to a lot of organizations where they're, they may be using something like GitLab for CI/CD, but then all of a sudden they're like, you know what, I really want to add these particular security tools into the mix. So I really want to be able to, build this up and offer it off to, my security folks. And how do I go about doing that without having to get them into something that's traditionally geared towards software delivery? And so I'm always thinking about, ways to be able to front end some of these systems, or, the stuff that I myself have been working on with Refactr. It's really around, trying to solve this broader problem, which is how, catering towards the broader technical audience of folks out there and being able to meet them where they can start using things as opposed to trying to force them into systems that are traditionally not geared towards them, which has always been the conundrum.
Right. You talked about platforms too. I mean, what is kind of your opinion about private cloud versus public cloud versus hybrid versus, because I saw your talk last week, you were talking about hybrid clouds. So I want to get some opinions on that.
Yeah. So unless you're a startup born in the cloud, you're going to have on-premise and you're going to have stuff in the public cloud, right? So you're going to have a hybrid approach. And so the key there is, all right, if I create this automation, I create these pipelines, how do I apply what I build as a pipeline and also decoupling certain automation tasks that I could run on-premise or in the public cloud, and then also thinking about how tooling works as well. So this is why a lot of people, like going back to like Terraform, hone in on something like Terraform, because I can use Terraform in a hybrid environment because Terraform has providers that can work with VMware and so on the on-premise side, but then also being able to build stuff in the public cloud. And so almost every organization has a hybrid approach now, even if they're trying to get more and more of their workloads into the public cloud. And so you also have to hone in on the CI/CD platform that you're going to use that will be able to support you in the public cloud as well as on-premise, especially if you're trying to do more than software delivery. So what I like to always equate is, the public cloud originally was created for developers. A lot of these tools out there, the DevOps tools out there were created for developers, and that's all fine. But now all of a sudden, when we're like, hey, I want to be able to take my on-premise infrastructure of these third-party applications and move them into the public cloud, it's now, or I want to still keep them on-premise, but I want to start automating things, inside of that, or anything that I'm doing that new. You have to start thinking about the tools that you're using and the CI/CD platform that is going to enable you to be able to bridge across the on-premise and the public cloud side. Because if you don't have that, then a lot of organizations I see where you're kind of doing things in isolation, where you have one process, or say the ops team, building some automation, but completely siloed onto what they're doing. Then you have the DevOps and the software engineering side doing their own thing. And so really, it's not just trying to bring together the on-premise and the public cloud, but it's also trying to bring together these teams so that they can provide what they're doing in a hybrid approach as well. And another good example that's like network automation. A lot of firewalls and network devices. A lot of organizations are trying to take the on-prem, what they're doing traditionally have done on-premise, and now start spinning up a virtual firewall in the public cloud. And now I want and then I set up my configuration. Well, if I can decouple something like a configuration and apply that, whether it's on-premise or in the public cloud, I now have a way to be able to create automation that can bridge across on-premise and public cloud. So that's really where the hybrid approach comes in, to make sure that you can start building automation thinking about that. And then as you move more and more into the public cloud, or maybe you keep a lot of stuff on premise, then it doesn't matter to you anymore. It's a matter of just thinking about how you build the automation, not necessarily where your workloads or what you're trying to automate lives per se.
Right. When you look at clouds, do you look at it more from a heterogeneous approach, like different types of cloud providers, or try to stick to one?
Yeah. So it's like anything, right? It's like the same thing I talk about tooling. It's like the more you add into the mix, the more cognitive overload or overhead you have to be able to understand multiple cloud providers. That being said, different cloud providers provide different capabilities, and so sometimes mixing and matching makes a lot of sense for your organization. Or it could be that, hey, this particular cloud provider is located closer from a geographical standpoint, and I have some sort of latency issue that I need to make sure that I can solve for. Or maybe it's I have an IAM or identity and access management that I want to use, say Azure AD, because I'm on O365 and I want to use that and move all of my Active Directory to use that service, but then everything else I'm doing infrastructure wise, I want to use AWS. So it's thinking about what makes sense for the organization, and also what the overall organization's requirements are, and then how you can build that into the overall pipelining that you're creating, and the approaching it from a multi-cloud standpoint. But there are a lot of organizations that are using one cloud provider, and that's completely fine too. I think as we start getting more and more containerized, where we can abstract away the need even from a cloud provider, where I can have workloads that can be deployed anywhere on any cloud provider, we'll get to a place where people will end up like looking and saying, hey, maybe I'll move my workloads solely due to cost or whatever, that type of reason. But for right now, it's more about just picking the different services that make sense for your organization, that are going to work for you, and not being concerned if you're using multi-cloud, because every enterprise that I've gone into is doing multi-cloud, whether it's because different teams decided they wanted to use different cloud providers, or different services made more sense for them, whatever the case is. But they now have multiple different workloads, so now you have to think about how you're going to be able to support those, and also what is overall is going to not only make the most sense for your organization, but again, that goes back to like the tooling you pick and the pipeline you create, and all of that goes into the overall thought process, and like how much effort you want to put in as well to having to adding in other clouds too, and what that's going to look like for your organization.
Gotcha. So here we have William Nelson saying that you mentioned Argo CD earlier, and do you see a trend towards GitOps right now?
I think organizations are trying to get there. I see some large organizations like the DoD pushing pretty heavily on that. I would say that I think it's more still a kind of there's definitely a trend moving in that direction, but I also feel like there's a lot more that we have to flush out in order for that to make sense for a lot more organizations, and your overall process too. So as you're starting to change your process and starting to be able to incorporate how you go about being able to deliver things, you're going to be able to incorporate the different things like GitOps into the mix. So, and Argo CD is specific to Kubernetes too. So not only do you have to aspire to GitOps, but you also have to aspire to being, on Kubernetes too, to be able to go that route. So I think, it's still kind of figuring itself out, and some organizations are embracing it, but I feel like we're kind of where Kubernetes was 3 years ago when it comes to GitOps, 3-4 years ago, where we're like kind of right at the very beginning, where people are starting to say, does this work? I like the idea of it. The actual execution, implementation, and overhead of what's required is still kind of TBD on what that looks like, in your organization, and what that's going to mean.
I'm glad that William kind of honed in on this. But for those that don't know, why don't you tell us, Micheal, what Argo CD is?
Yeah, so it's a continuous deployment solution for Kubernetes. So that anytime that you make a code commit, you'll be able to have updates to your Kubernetes cluster. And so it really kind of helps to automate the ops side of what traditionally you would have somebody like building out infrastructure and so on. So that's really what it's for, and it's specifically for Kubernetes.
Gotcha. Then the second part to that question that William had was, does Refactr have anything that can help a company adopt that methodology?
Yeah, so at Refactr specifically, we kind of take the approach of, approaching all this holistically, but, from a GitOps perspective or that type of approach, still leveraging, you're still going to need a Git provider. You still need to have some sort of process that you can have incorporated into that. At Refactr, we don't provide Git repos. We don't provide that side of it. But what we do provide is an automation platform to tie into that to enable you to streamline your overall processes. And we're really about empowering organizations to push collaboration amongst, the DevOps, the dev, and security and ops teams, so that everybody can cohesively work together in one single unified platform. So from that standpoint, we're very much about that type of streamlined methodology and process and how that goes. And then it really just depends on, how your organization wants to tackle the essentially getting the agile process of, being able to provide pipelining to everybody in the organization. And so that's critical. So we can definitely help there. But it's really about figuring out, what you're currently doing and how we can, tie right into your current processes of what you're doing and where you sit in the maturity level. Because, we go into some places that are super mature, and we tie into what they're already currently doing. And then some are just completely net new. We build from scratch and help build out the entire, pipelining process and process in general.
Gotcha. So with these kind of tough times that we have, with COVID and people protesting and all this going on, what kind of advice do you have on how to lead a company virtually? What works well, what doesn't? What have you seen?
Yeah, so it's funny because we were pretty much virtual before this pandemic hit, and so. I think half the company now that we've hired in the last few months, we hired without even meeting in person. So it's a completely different approach and process to even from a hiring standpoint, which is interesting. So I would say that, being able to find, people that still work within the culture that you're trying to instill in your organization is critical. It depends on the type of organization too. So we're a startup, so that's a little bit, different. We need a certain type of person versus, corporate America. But I would say that from a leadership standpoint, it's really critical to make sure that you have constant communication with all of your employees and teams. And we even incorporated, even like in Slack, a water cooler channel to make sure that we can even, talk personally, because it seems that you get on a Zoom or a Teams meeting and it's go business all day long. Yeah. Not realizing, like, if you're taking somebody out of an office environment where you'd have that environment where you could talk about even some things on a personal basis, having that type of even things like a Slack channel is helpful to help people understand that we're still all humans that have families and other things going on, and it's always good to be able to relate to other folks. And so that's something that we've kind of honed in on as well, to try to incorporate more of that into the mix. So we can, it's not just about, business meetings all day long. It's also trying to incorporate, something from a personal standpoint, like you would expect if you were in the office.
Right. So it's more like an open door policy type Slack channel.
Exactly.
Open door, come ask me anything,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the key, is just being super open about everything. And then also, just, hey, hey, this is transparency is another key thing where you want to make sure, because especially if you're not in front of people all day long, it's very easy to be out of sight, out of mind. So making sure that everybody knows that there's always a place to be able to talk about whatever from their standpoint, and then also being able to be able to talk together as smaller teams too. So we focus very much on smaller team meetings as well.
Yeah, we're reaching close to the hour on this, but I want to leave a few minutes in case anybody has some unanswered questions they want to post on there. But my last kind of question to you is, are there any fundraising things or that you guys are doing as either individually or as a company that that you would recommend people help out?
Oh, you mean for just during COVID-19 in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different programs going on out there to be able to help out. We kind of aspire to, if you're in your community and you have things that are local to you, obviously it's, certain places are not really, are opened up now, other places aren't, but,
Right.
trying to help volunteer if you can, or be able to contribute to local nonprofits that are helping people out are especially critical. And during these times, we don't have anything official from that standpoint that we're doing, but we try to help out where we can, when we can, and it's all about community, right? Trying to help out your overall.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's not about even giving money. I mean, sometimes it's just about being able to answer a phone, talk to somebody, help somebody out. Go get somebody some groceries or something. Like you said, it's a community thing, be helpful to the community.
Yeah, I even put her out there too. Like if you're looking for a job because you've been recently laid off, definitely, our door is always open. You can ping me, but it's one of those things where that's another place to help people out as well. So I've helped kind of facilitate introductions there as well, or if we have a spot as well in our company, totally open for that as well. And that's another way to help out too, because there are a lot of people out there that have been laid off. I think it was Deloitte just announced they were laying off 6,000 people. So it's happening on all kinds of large companies that you may not have expected it from, but they're starting to lay people off too.
We usually do that. We have a DevOps Days Slack channel that we usually have a channel itself just for jobs, and we post anybody looking for jobs. We usually post them out there, or if somebody's looking for a job, they ask, they're looking for this or that, and we try to help them out any way we can that way as well in the community. But
awesome.
Let's see if there's any other questions. Anybody have any other questions out there that they like to pose before we wrap it up here? Let's see. Still checking here. Doesn't look like it. So I think with this, if I don't see anything in the next few minutes, we will end this broadcast. And I really want to thank you, Micheal, for taking time to having this casual chat with us and share some of your knowledge and experience and leadership thoughts with the community here in Dallas.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, Mike, and really appreciate the time, and looking forward to anything in the future and any way I can help out as well. So just let me know. I'll try to see if I can put in a talk for 2021, August 2021, is it, in your neck of the woods? So I'll submit a talk when the time comes for the call for papers.
Sound good. If anybody wants to ask Micheal any last minute question that you didn't get a chance to answer here on the air, there's his Twitter handle. It's ITS Code. You can ask him more about ITS Code. You can ask him anything you want about security. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer security questions for you all day long.
Yeah, there's probably all kinds of questions I can answer for you. So I'm always open to ping. That's how we talk, right, Mike?
Yeah, direct message, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, mine is Mike Ross TX. So if you need anything, I'm there for you. Okay. With that, we'll end this session for tonight, and we'll see everyone in a couple of weeks. We'll have another meetup. Till then, keep safe and stay healthy, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.